Good morning, folks. Here we are. It's October 9th on Wednesday, and in the left chair today is my friend Jim Wilfong, and I'm Tom McLaughlin from Lovell, Maine. Jim is from Stow, Maine, next town over from us, and so we have, as usual, many things going on, of which we'll only scratch the surface, so we may only talk about one or two issues, and depends what the producer has for us this morning. And are you ready to go?
Sure.
Okay.
How are you doing, Tom?
I'm doing good for an old white guy.
Well, you're not as old as I am, so.
That's true. But I'm not too far behind either, am I? I'm 68.
I'm 72.
Oh, okay. Well, 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not much. Well,
Not
when you're a teenager, it makes a difference. But
When
at
you're a
our
teenager,
age,
it makes no difference.
no, it doesn't. Okay. Do you support President Trump's decision to pull troops out of Syria? How about that? You know, that was one we talked about last night on the telephone.
Yeah, we did. And I don't. Not because I think that we ought to be involved in these endless wars, because I don't feel that way. But I do feel that abandoning the Kurds, who have been fighting hard by our sides and have been solid allies, is I don't think we should do things like that. Perhaps it's my old Marine Corps background. I don't know, but we stand up for the people who stand up with us. And I just was listening to the radio coming in, and the offensive against them has started. And so
Where?
The Turks have launched an attack
When?
into northeastern
Yesterday?
Syria. No, this morning.
This morning. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just heard it. They just announced it.
Wow.
So for me, it's I think it's Americans, we ought to stand with people who stood with us. That's just my view.
Well, a phrase came up as you were speaking, and that is,
Yeah.
America doesn't have any permanent allies, only permanent interests.
Going back to the British Prime Minister in the mid-19th century.
Well, it's. I also thought about the Montagnards in Vietnam. Do you remember them? They were our allies, and they were a tribal people.
Yes.
And they worked with us, and we, of course, pulled out.
We
And
left them
then
behind.
We did, and there are probably some others as well. And if I think long enough in history, so the Kurds. But I mean, the Kurds are disenfranchised. The disembodied country. They don't have any sovereignty. And if you call Kurdistan, that is areas in which this ethnic group called the Kurds has an ancestral homeland. It straddles Iran, it's in Syria and Turkey.
And Iraq.
And so they would like to be national. They're more loyal to their tribe than they are to either of those national nation states. And so for Turkey, you got someone like Erdogan who wants to, I think, reestablish the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
Which was, well, if you don't believe that ISIS was itself a caliphate,
yes.
which they called themselves, the last caliphate was Turkey, was the Ottoman Empire.
The Ottomans, yes.
And so now who's our enemy in the area? Our enemy would be, go ahead.
Well, no, I think
Radical Islam.
Yes, it has been the ISIS forces, and the Kurds. I mean, if we just look at it from a very pragmatic point of view, the Kurds have about 11,000 ISIS prisoners that they have in their control. And what happens when the attack comes? Their ability to control what happens with those prisoners probably goes out the window. And I'm not saying that it's simple, Tom. It's not a simple decision, because let's not also forget that the Turks are part of our NATO alliance, and the NATO alliance has been also very important to us. I mean, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, the access to the Black Sea, You know, that where it sits strategically between east and west, and the Caspian Sea basin for oil and natural gas, and what was it the British used to call it? The Great Game was played out in that area, and really a lot of this gets traced back till post World War I, when the British and the French kind of divided up that whole area and created a problem after the caliphate, for the Turkish caliphate fell apart.
Sykes-Picot, I think, was the treaty.
That's right.
Yeah, and were they mindful? How mindful were they when drawing those borders? And if you look at the map, they're pretty straight lines, and most of them. And there was a woman, a British aristocratic woman who I don't think she ever married, and spent her young adulthood in that area, and almost like a T.E. Lawrence sort of a character. But prior to him, they knew each other. They were contemporaries, both aristocrats, British aristocrats. But she advised on that Sykes-Picot Treaty about where to put the lines, knowing, as she did personally, many of the tribal leaders, and understanding what the animosities were, with each other, and but it could have been even worse than it turned out to be. But of course, the Kurds, here back to them, they were just locked out. No, they weren't considered a strong enough ethnicity. Which I think they've proven they are. They are. The Peshmerga, I think, isn't that the name of their fighting force?
Yes, it is.
And I remember.
They've been very tough.
Yeah, I have a former student was Monroe Mann was Army intelligence officer with the Kurds, with the Peshmerga.
Oh, really?
In Iraq, yeah, and the first time we were there. And he was nothing but respect for them. He thought the world of the Kurds. So
it requires, I think it requires real serious diplomatic efforts, and that's what I think. It can't be, I think we should do this now. I think that's why we saw Jim Mattis, before he left as defense secretary. He was, I think he principally left over the idea that we were going to abandon the Kurds.
I think you're right. And, he was a good enough soldier,
a Marine,
to not say so to the media. Yes. But others who knew him knew why.
Yes,
and
that's
I think
right.
he basically said, to his commander-in-chief, he said, well, I think you deserve someone who believes strongly in your mission, as you've now stated, and so I'm going to resign.
Yeah.
So in other words, I don't agree with what you're doing.
Yes.
It's a backhanded way of saying that.
Yes.
He was a good soldier. Is a good soldier. He's got a book out now too.
I guess he does. Yeah. I haven't read it or any.
Well, I've heard it on what's his name, Hugh Hewitt show. He has a talk show from 9 to noon.
Okay.
Every morning on WGAN, and he was like, he'll have his guests on there for an hour.
Yeah.
And so he had Mattis on for an hour.
Oh, he did
every morning.
Oh, really?
Talking that extensively about his book, and it was fascinating. Mattis is a very, very smart guy.
Mattis is a pretty smart guy. I mean, he's a real historian. He understands history, and he operates from that, and I think that's reasonable. So I'm concerned.
He'd be about your age too, wouldn't he?
I think he is.
Yeah.
I think he is about my age.
Jim is a former Marine, in case people. I think we said that the last time you were here.
Yeah, and of course he was a Marine general, and I had a lot of respect for him.
Just got something from the producer.
Yeah.
Turkey's, just what you said, announces invasion of northern Syria after Trump abandons the Kurds. And he's got one. Let's see, I'll read. It's a tweet from Erdogan. The Turkish armed services, together with the Syrian National Army just launched Operation Peace Spring. Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Against PKK, YPG, and DAESH, don't know how to pronounce that, terrorists in northern Syria. Our mission is to prevent the creation of a terror corridor across our southern border and to bring peace to the area. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
He calls the Kurds terrorists, and that's the basis of his this planned onslaught.
Yes.
This brings up another issue. Erdogan, I think, is jockeying for position as the renewed caliphate, the reestablishment of the Ottoman Empire. He is not in the tradition of, his predecessor in the 1920s, right after World War II, who said that Islam will have nothing to do. We're going to be a democratic state. We're going to be a republic, and his name will come to me if I keep talking.
To me too.
Yeah,
We're
right.
showing our age, Tom.
We are. But I don't think he has that intention at all. I think he's since that attempted coup, he's just consolidated power, and he's going to be there until he's dead.
And he's also been operating in that area where there were lots of Kurds. I believe it's in the southeast section where Turkey, Iraq, and Iran come together.
It is the southeast section.
And they've been essentially performing what some people call ethnic cleansing. And then repopulating the area with Turks who are non-Kurds.
Turks who are
Yes.
ethnic Turks.
Yes,
yeah.
correct.
Well, I mean that's not unprecedented either when you think about what they did to the Armenians.
Oh yeah.
They ethnically cleansed. Let's just call it genocide against Armenian Christians.
Yeah.
And Greek Christians who were in there. There are about 200,000 or 300,000 Greek Christians who were wiped out at the same time. But that was a Muslim thing.
Yeah.
And it was not unlike what is going on now. I mean, who did ISIS kill? Well, they killed a lot of different people, but Christians, I mean, they crucified them.
The Kurds are essentially Yazidi Christians. So.
Well, that's what they did to the Yazidis, raped and pillaged.
Right. And they are Kurds.
It's
a nasty, that's where I say, we just need to have really seriously have good diplomacy there, and trying to handle that. It's no easy way to handle it. It's only a difficult way, and it's not going to be done quickly, and it may not be forever. Who knows? But that's the way you have to proceed, unless you just want these people who have been allies of ours to be essentially wiped out.
Kemal Ataturk.
Ataturk, yes. Thank you.
Was the guy who wanted to separate church and state.
Yes, he
in
did.
Turkey, and that, I think, and Erdogan is working in the other direction.
Yes, he is.
And so for him to call the Kurds terrorists is to lump them together with ISIS, together with Al Qaeda,
correct,
and together with the Revolutionary Guard in Iran. Now, Islam is, when I said what is the problem? Who is our enemy in the region? Now I'm going beyond the Turkish-Syrian border to the whole region, to the whole what we call Middle East, and that is, it's Islam, radical Islam. Now, one thing Erdogan said, he was asked about radical Islam, and he said, there is no radical Islam. There is just Islam. Now,
well, I mean, I read all of that as fundamentalism, and fundamentalism across religions can be, they tend to be not as flexible in dealing with other people, and they see their way or the highway, and so that can be a problem.
That is the threat from Erdogan. Now, Trump, wasn't it just yesterday that he had the press conference, I think last night, No, it wasn't last night because I didn't watch it. It was the night before last.
Uh-huh.
And I was watching Brett Baer's 6 to 7 show, and he had his guests on, and they're talking about this issue. And then, you know, Trump was going to they're going to preempt the show, which they did, in order to hear his remarks talking to his generals. And he basically said, justifying his decision to pull U.S. troops out of this area of Turkey. We still have them in the southern Syria, this area of Syria. I mean, I said Turkey.
Of Syria, right.
And he said, if he should attack the Kurds or any American interests, then he didn't threaten military response, but a economic response,
Yes.
so sanctions and so forth, and destroy the Turkish economy.
Obliterate, I believe, was
Yeah, I
his
think
word.
he did say that. Now, okay, right now,
Well,
right away, he's doing. What's going to happen? I mean, how will Trump respond to this?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, I mean, he's, you know, I just think I don't think it's well considered, his moves, and this is one that I don't think was, you know, he apparently didn't contact any of the generals in the area until after the announcement, so the Pentagon was not alerted, and he didn't contact the State Department, so he made this rather what I would call a very rash, impromptu decision. And it, you know, Tom, what it all goes back to and reminds me of is just the power that the U.S. Congress has given up over the last 60 years in not being the ones who are declaring war and committing our forces, and that the president essentially decides to do whatever the president wants at that particular moment, and they've ceded that power because it's difficult. It's not simple, and we ceded it starting
65
you know, in 65, really, and you know, it's as a consequence, we enter into these never-ending conflicts. And this business since 9/11, the U.S. Pentagon has referred to it as the Long War. That's their
against
term
radical
for
Islam.
Yes, and against essentially against terrorists and which apparently, you know, means radical Islam. Yeah.
So it has many facets, and they don't all work together. I mean, Al Qaeda is Sunni. Iran is Shiite.
Yes.
Bashar Assad is Shiite.
Yes.
Turkey is Sunni.
Yeah, Assad is Alawite, which is
another ethnicity.
Yeah, it's an ethnicity and a splinter group of Shia. Yeah, so it's, yeah, I mean, this stuff is not easy, and lots of these so-called terrorist groups are non-state actors. They don't. It's hard to get to them. I mean, you have to search around to find out who's supporting who on any particular moment. You do,
and they were fighting each other in Syria. It was hard to. I was trying to keep track of all the different groups and coalitions that are fighting each other to essentially either get rid of Assad or keep him in.
Yeah.
And Iran was a major player there. Hezbollah was their proxy.
Is.
Now Hezbollah is Shiite. But now they threaten northern Israel. Now, our ally in the region is Israel, and then Hamas along the Gaza Strip, they're Sunni.
Yes.
And yet, they get weapons smuggled into them from Iran.
Yeah.
So Iran is supplying Hezbollah extensively, and Hamas, both of whom are pledged to destroy Israel and kill every last Jew. Actually, the Hamas charter, that's what it's in. Kill every Jew in Palestine. They don't say Israel, or the Zionist entity, as they refer to it. But I mean, that's a complicated region. So
The
now
whole
here
thing
we,
is complicated.
so what have we done now? We have almost pledged recently. I mean, we've had very crippling economic sanctions against Iran because Iran, one, is developing a nuclear weapon. Two, they're doing things like I just described. They're proxy wars in Yemen,
Right.
in Lebanon, and so forth. And so they're the number one terrorist state in the world, and they're now attacking Saudi oil facilities, bombing its tankers, setting charges against its tankers, and then Trump acts as though he is going to retaliate militarily or threatens to do so for that. I mean, what are all these weapons we sold to Saudi? Why are we acting? And then was it Tulsi Gabbard said, "Who are we? Are we their pimp? I mean, are we going to? We just bound when if Saudi says something, we just jump."
Yeah.
And she had a point.
She has a big point.
Yeah, and
She has a big point, I think. No, she has a big point. We're caught in this wedge. The Europeans and the Asians are getting a lot of oil from the Middle East. We get very little from the Middle East,
Right.
nowadays.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. And but we're caught in the middle of all that. If it wasn't for the oil and the natural gas that the world gets from the Middle East, nobody would care a whit. But maybe we ought to consider going back and looking at the turmoil that George H.W. Bush had it right. He didn't want to break it and own it. When he didn't go into Iraq, he pulled back and said, "Okay, we're not going to do this." Maybe he had the right idea. And because
in hindsight, it certainly seems that way. Yes, and when his son went into Iraq the second time, the first time for W, and the second time for the U.S., then that proved to be unwise.
It was unwise, and it was, they really didn't plan for. They had a naive view of what might happen there, I think. And the thing fell apart. It's not simple going in. I think that's the whole area is complicated, and it's complicated because of we spoke earlier the treaty after World War I. Mm-hmm. That's the way that was all divided up. I mean, Jordan's the kingdom that was put together with Jordan, that monarchy was taken from over on the Persian Gulf and established in Jordan. I mean, these things were just put together to benefit the people who were in the countries who were getting the oil, and that's pretty much says it.
Okay, there's that dynamic.
Yeah.
And you have, in Islam, you have Sunni and Shia that have been like this
Yes, absolutely.
for 1,400 years.
I know.
Okay, so that's something. Is that going to get solved? No.
No.
And it looks like Trump is aware of that, and he's playing it, with his support lately of Saudi Arabia against Iran. He sees Iran as the bigger threat in that particular area. Now, they're both border the Persian Gulf. Iran has more proximity to the Strait of Hormuz than Saudi Arabia, but Saudi's not too far away.
It's not.
There's Qatar, and there's Yemen, and there's another. Oh, I forget. There's all these little emirates in that area, but right on the tip of the Strait of Hormuz is on the western side is not Saudi. It's some other little emirate.
Is Oman is there?
I think it's
Qatar,
Oman. Yeah,
and the
I think it's
United
Oman.
Arab Emirates is also there.
Yeah,
and I mean this whole area is pretty hot, and you have essentially the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates who are kind of locked together and as allies, and they, for some reason, are not fond of Qatar. And then we, of course, have in the middle of all this our Fifth Fleet, and they're permanently stationed there.
And so they're targets. You know,
They're
by
absolute
being there,
targets.
they're targets. Just as there's some wisdom in what Trump is doing, pulling back from that Turkish border region, in that if we are attacked by the Turks or by any other entity in that area, then we're sucked right back in.
Oh no! Well,
And so, you know, the garrison in the south is more easily defended and less likely to be, and stronger than the one up there with where the Kurds are. It's complicated. But what I was going to say earlier, Erdogan, the way to become the caliph, which is what he sees himself, I think, as being, is to unite, to the extent that he can, Sunnis and Shia. And by coming out against Israel, he's engineered, Turkey was essentially a pro-Israeli foreign policy it had. He's shifted it around to anti-Israel foreign policy. And when Hamas was blockaded, Gaza was blockaded by Israel, he tried to break the blockade. And that wasn't that long ago, just a few years ago. And I think he did so as to come out as, you know, he's going to be more anti-Israel than Iran. I think he sees Iran as a rival for his becoming caliph. That's what I think his long game is.
well, I mean, Iran is not a small country either. It has 75 or 80 million people.
Yeah.
It's not small, and it's a pretty good-sized landmass.
Yes.
And they are, you know, they are an old civilization of people.
Older than the Turks.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, and you know, our problem. I mean, we have to figure out how we don't desert people who have stood with us, who are helpless with a force like the Turks. At the same time, keep the Turks reasonably happy, because you know, the Russians' southern stream of natural gas is going to come down through and into Turkey, and is going to require long-term agreements with Turkey for pipelines to supply the southern part of Europe. And they're very anxious to get that natural gas down there. But then there's a lot of natural gas in that whole area in the Persian Gulf. And so the Iranians are happy from their side. They would be happy to come up through Turkey, and they could connect into that natural gas pipeline. And they have a lot of natural gas. And then we have the Saudis and all the Emirates on the other side. And they don't have an easy way, except to liquefy it and put it in a tanker. They don't have an easy way to get to the pipeline, because they can't go up through Syria, and they can't go up through, you know, Iraq very easily. And especially, they couldn't go up through when ISIS was occupying the Sunni area of Iraq. So, you know, the whole thing is complicated by newly discovered natural gas off the coast of Syria, which the Russians already have agreements with the Syrians. They've been long-term allies of the Syrians, so we have them in there, and we don't want to get in the middle of that. Well, they were there, you know, after. They were there after World War II. They've been a supporter of Assad, and they were a supporter of Assad and Saddam. Hafez. Yes, correct. So they were, you know. Yeah. It's.
And then then the U.S. kind of took over, became the big kid on the block. But then, only within the last 10 years have we pulled back, and Russia's moved back in to, and made that deal that you just spoke of.
Yeah, no, and they have that deal, you know. So there's and then there's natural gas off the coast of Israel, and off the part which is Gaza, and so there's, you know, there's money involved, as well as geopolitical interests. So it's complicated.
It is complicated. Our main ally in the region would be Israel, and yeah, the Kurds too. But then Saudi Arabia is shining up to Israel. not so much because they like Israel, but that they even offered to allow Israeli jets to go over the airspace of Saudi Arabia in order to attack nuclear facilities in Iran.
Oh, sure. They
Yeah.
did that several years ago
Yes,
when that took place.
during the Bush administration.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's, and the Saudis are not what I'd call great Democrats. I mean,
Who is in the area?
I
Israel
know.
alone is
Oh,
the only democracy in the area.
I know. I know. It's.
I mean, Hussein in Jordan is. I mean, he's a monarch.
he's reasonable, but he's a monarch.
Yeah.
Established after World War I, once again.
Yeah.
So it's all very complicated, very very difficult, and it keeps the United States operating out of 1,000 bases around the world. And
So he says we're not the world's policemen, and we're soldiers. You know, our military shouldn't be policemen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I understand that concept, and I agree with it, but we are.
But we are.
We are. And so, do we get out of Korea? Do we get out of Germany? Do we look at all the places
I
where
know.
we've been for so long?
I know.
And just,
Mm-hmm.
man,
I
don't
know.
How many Americans understand this stuff that we're discussing?
I don't think a lot of people
No.
necessarily do. And I understand it doesn't come, they're not in contact with it on a daily basis. And I don't know if you heard this past week that we had, I thought, and I pay attention to this stuff, and you do, I know, but I heard I thought that we were, for the most part, out of Somalia, except that there was a base of ours hit in Somalia in the last week. And
No, I didn't hear that one either.
and so and you might that makes sense. The Horn of Africa, just down from the Arabian Peninsula and the Persian Gulf and so
Another
forth.
strategic area, the Red Sea.
Another very
access, yeah.
strategic area.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we had a base hit there, and we have bases in many places, and
Not to
so
mention-
then and so then you have to ask, well, all right, so we're the largest economic and military power in the world, but if we keep this up, maybe we won't be. And I always look at it and say, okay, what's necessary to keep the trade lanes open? How do we keep trade so that we don't have
A powerful navy.
a powerful navy? And I was just reading last night that the new Marine Commandant wants to take the Marines back away from having been a land force like they have been in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Vietnam. To turn them back into the amphibious force of the Navy. And I've been waiting for that because in this new world, actually having them in the fleet makes some sense when you have to do something, which is what were originally kind of put together to do, which is to extend power, not just from the ships, only from the ships, but they could actually land Marines into areas and either get people out of there that may be in a particular place, vertically envelop into the area, push a perimeter out, get people inside the perimeter, and then go. And so, and they want to have, so that they're not targets in the fleet, they're talking about forward expeditionary bases where they already are pre-positioned. So there's, it's all of this stuff is changing around, and we have got to somehow figure out how to do this without breaking the bank, because we're, our infrastructure, the real power of America is in soft power and economic power. That's where the real power lies.
And that's what Trump is exercising, mostly. I mean, he's building up his military again, but he's look at his strategy there is to cripple Iran economically, and he declined to hit them militarily,
Which I actually applaud him for, quite frankly.
And that's when he threatened Erdogan this time, it was economically, again, and not militarily. And so he is doing what he said he would do, and he's trying at least, when in his campaign speeches, to get out of these endless wars. But can we ever get out of these endless wars? Let's shift over to Afghanistan, because Afghanistan, I mean, there it is. It's another Muslim country. Again, tribal, it had never been a nation state. You never could call it a nation state.
No, it was created after the British left. I mean,
yes, but the British had to get the hell out. I mean, even in the 1800s, they had to get the hell out. And who was better at consolidating a worldwide empire than the British?
Right.
And they were masters of it. They're better than we were.
For a century and a half.
Yeah. The sun never set on the British Empire. And I used to teach that to my students. They have to get a globe out in order to say, okay, let's shine a light. Here's the sun, and spin the globe and say, see, this part here is the British Empire, blah, blah, blah. It's remarkable that they're able to do it. But how did they do it? A navy.
A navy and economic power.
Well, yeah. But they kind of go together.
Yeah, they do.
One without the other.
Well, you can't.
Not worldwide.
No. And actually, you need the Navy to keep the trade lanes open.
Yeah.
And not just for the United States, but to keep the trade lanes open in the world. I'm, as I think I said last time, I'm a free market guy, and I believe that we're doing the right thing when we're having trade around the world, and that's important, and it represents. Global trade for us, just for us, is somewhere between $5 and $6 trillion a year. So it's a lot of money.
Should we get out of Afghanistan? Same way we're getting out of
I'm sorry, I left Afghanistan. I don't know. We have to somehow we have to get out without turning it back over to Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups. I mean, how do we, if we in fact don't care after 18 years of it, then why did we do it in the first place? Why didn't we just go in and chase down Al Qaeda and get rid of them and then get the hell out? I mean, that
would have been, in hindsight again, that would have been the thing to do. Can we build nations there? Is nation building a reasonable foreign policy?
Not if we have to do it through the military means only. Supporting people through diplomacy and trade,
economic incentives as well as threats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the way to do these things, quite frankly, especially in a world that's gotten quite small, and especially in a world where when we, it doesn't matter who we're involved in. Oh, well, it does actually. If we get involved with a big global power, the United States isn't going to sit here and not be hit. But anyway, it is. These weapons are very, very expensive. It costs us a lot of money in blood and treasure. And what we ought to be thinking about is where and why we are going to put American soldiers.
What hill do we die on?
Yeah, what hill do we die on, and why are we doing that?
Well, yeah.
And that is what the founders had in mind. And it is
by giving power to declare war to the Congress.
To the Congress.
Right. Now, the rationale was, you had the Gulf of Tonkin thing with Johnson.
Yes.
And he, that was.
But that was.
We now see that was unwise.
Right.
To give him so much power. Mm-hmm. The other rationale for giving the president so much power to make war was that in a nuclear age, when an ICBM can hit us in 20 minutes, the Congress can't convene, et cetera, we got to give them some emergency powers.
Exactly right.
But there was a tether on that.
Yes.
Only for 30 days, and then you have to, have convene Congress to decide, are we going to keep this up? How do we proceed? Well, that hasn't worked.
That has no, because it goes on forever, as we can see.
Yes, it does.
They still think that there's the authority for us to move anywhere in the world where we, think
the
that
president just thinks that we should send people.
Exactly.
And he's the commander-in-chief. The Constitution made him so, so that's good. But yet the Constitution realized that one one guy shouldn't be making these decisions. Better to have 435 or 535 people making those decisions.
And especially the House, because the House is closer to the people.
Yes.
And they really wanted that's where, and they also gave them the purse strings for the same reasons.
Yes.
And so they're connected.
So our founding fathers were pretty good.
They were.
Now, what's the House doing now? I'm going to go back to something from the Federalist paper in which Hamilton talked about what the House is up to right now. See what you think of this.
Okay.
So,
which Federalist paper is this?
I don't have the number.
Okay.
And it's
no problem.
written in 1788, and Hamilton said, he talked about the inherently political nature of impeachment proceedings, and it be sure to polarize the country. So here's what he said. The prosecution of impeachment, he said, now I'm quoting, will seldom fail to agitate the passions of the whole community and to divide it into parties more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. In many cases, it will connect itself with the pre-existing factions and will enlist all their animosities, partialities, influence, and interest on one side or the other. And in such cases, there will always be the greatest danger that the decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by the real demonstrations of innocence or guilt.
I think he's right.
Prescient, wasn't he?
He was.
But he talks about the comparative strength of parties. But at the time, we didn't have the parties. We didn't understand that word as we do now, Democrat and Republican.
No, he saw him coming, though.
He did.
Yes.
Yes.
He was a smart guy.
So he basically says that the impeachment process, as designed now, I mean, this is to try to get people to ratify the Constitution, which is set up the way it was, and giving the House the power of impeachment. Is it more of a political process or a legal process?
It's a political process. I think that he makes it clear, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's a political process. It would supposedly, hopefully, with the idea that in any circumstance that the Constitution is being protected. That's the cover. But it is not a legal process. It is not. You don't
Even
have to
though it
have,
says high crimes and misdemeanors, which are legal terms, right?
Yeah, well, yes, maybe yes and no. I'm not certain. I think it was necessarily, because then they have no definition of what high crime and misdemeanor is.
They don't.
No.
Nor do they have any procedures to follow.
Nor do they have any procedures to follow.
And so, what do you think of the procedures as they're being implemented now?
I don't know. I mean, if I look at the Clinton times, I mean, I could ask the same questions. I guess. I think an inquiry. I don't have a problem with them looking at it, and then they should lay it out and let the American people decide. Lay out whatever it is that they have. Make their case. They're going to make their case of whatever this is, make their case and see what the American people think.
By making their case, do you mean putting words together into articles of impeachment?
Or just putting words together and laying the case out, like you might lay it out in a courtroom, lay out why you think that this is a violation of the Constitution.
I don't have anyone to quote because we seem to be, our politics are governed by leaks now. That is, I can't say, well, Adam Schiff or Nancy Pelosi or
the
anybody
White
else
House
said this.
Or the White House. I mean, the White House
I can say
doesn't.
Donald Trump. He talks enough.
No,
right?
he does, but his White House is as leaky as a sieve.
It is, but it doesn't seem, the leaks don't seem to be in his favor.
No, they don't. No, I agree. I understand. They don't seem to be.
No.
Yeah.
So
Washington is a leaky place. Harry Truman had it right, Said if you're looking for a friend in Washington, you better buy a dog.
Yep.
That's the truth. So it's hard to know, Tom, what the truth is sometimes. It's hard to know.
So,
And but I think it's the words mean something, and so words do mean something. Whether it's Alexander Hamilton's words or it's Donald Trump's words or it's pick your person. Words do mean something, and
I hope so.
I hope so.
But if they're unnamed sources or a high government official who wishes to remain anonymous, I mean, that seems to be what's driving the news cycle.
Are you talking about the whistleblower or just anything?
It could be. I mean, but how often do you read a story in which that is the source? From major media sources like New York Times, Washington Post. I mean, how often do you see that? Well,
Right.
I see the headline
I
say,
know
whoa, who said that?
I know.
An unnamed source
I
who
know.
wishes to remain anonymous. I mean, that's not the way to run a government or a news outlet.
Well, it seems to be the way that the news outlets have been run since 1800. But as we talked about before, that Jefferson Adams presidential campaign was awful. And the thing that I find hard, and I really do, I think a lot about these things, and I find hard trying to find out what is the truth. And it's always going to be shaded one way or another, depending on the editorial staff and the editor, as to which articles, even if the article has absolutely got impeccable sources, okay?
Who are named.
Named, whatever. Where it gets placed in the paper, or if it gets placed in the paper.
If it's reported at all.
Is it above the fold on the front page, or is it buried on page 10?
Yeah.
I mean, those are all, it's hard to know.
That's the power of the press.
That's the power of the press. And every institution has its power. So I get that. And so then it's incumbent on us, which is hard, to sort of say, well, we got to see if we can get to the bottom of this. We've got to think about this. We've got to try to find more than one source if we can find it. It's hard. It's not easy. But then nobody said living in a democracy was easy. It's a contact sport.
So here we have an impeachment process. There is no vote on the House floor. No one goes on record as voting to open an inquiry or not. Mm-hmm. Okay, so and then the hearings that are taking place so far are all in secret.
Well, on the intelligence, but have the other one? I don't know if it's a question.
It seems to be Schiff
judiciary or intelligence. They're going to. I would think, that if I were running it and I didn't have problems with security clearances, I would want them right up front and right on television.
I would too.
But if judiciary, back when Nixon was impeached, the impeachment hearings went on. He wasn't impeached.
Peter Rodino.
Peter Rodino and Sam Irving. Yeah. They were the two guys, and that was all right up. That was, everyone was broadcast.
Yes.
But
I was watching.
I was too. But the intelligence committee might be different if they're going to.
See, there is no procedure, as I alluded to earlier. So it did in '73. It was the House Intelligence Committee started it, and Judiciary Committee started it.
Yes.
And then with Clinton, it was.
It must have been Judiciary, wasn't it?
I believe it was Judiciary.
It would have
too. And so, but this procedure is entirely different.
Right. It started in intelligence, and the rules are clear in the Constitution too. That each body makes its own rules. They are the ones who make the rules.
Yeah.
And part of
the party in the majority is that makes those rules.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Or can change them if it chooses.
Or can change them if it chooses just by the vote. I mean, it's still by a vote, but they're going to have the majority vote. And I think they changed the rules after Clinton, when the Republicans were in Congress. They changed the rules on an impeachment. And I'm trying to remember exactly what those rules were, but they made a change that's now coming back to bite them because it's, they made a change, and then when the Democrats took over, they didn't change the rules, and those rules are still in place. So it's, that all is clear, that it's, that's another reason that impeachment is more political. Because it's not a jury of peers.
So then it would seem that a crime isn't necessary in order to impeach.
I think that's correct.
So it doesn't look like they have one.
What was the crime with Andrew Johnson?
I read it, and not lately.
When the radical Republicans, as they were called at the time,
yes,
they wanted him gone because he was
has to do with
Southern.
Implementing Reconstruction.
It does, mm-hmm.
And that he wasn't doing it the way the radical Republicans wanted him to.
Right.
And it was such a technical point
mm-hmm.
that I don't recall. I can't tell you what it was because it just, I didn't fully understand it when I read it.
Right.
And it should be explicit. If you're going to be removing the president, of course, now he wasn't elected, Andrew Johnson.
No.
I mean, he took over because, Lincoln was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here you have an elected, Nixon was elected by a landslide.
Right.
Clinton was elected by a plurality.
Yes.
And now, so was Donald Trump, elected in a majority of electoral votes, but not popular votes.
Right.
And so, does that make him vulnerable? Well, it would seem so.
Uh-huh.
But there's been an effort to get rid of him since, prevent his election, for one thing. And it looks like this phone call to Ukrainian president was primarily about getting to the roots of the 2016 effort to prevent his election.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe. But was it that, or are we? I don't think we can be so naive to think that the President of the United States calls a newly elected person in the Ukraine and even no matter what they bring up, if they ask them to do them a favor, when they are really reliant on U.S. and NATO support, even though they're not a NATO country, in order to keep the Russians at bay. After all, the Ukrainians have lost 13,000 soldiers in this fight. It's not a minor amount.
In Crimea.
And so, these things, it certainly isn't, I don't think, just about, it's once again political. Let's just put it that way.
So it's pretty clear that Trump has Barr and what's his name? The special prosecutor whose name always escapes me. The former U.S. attorney from Connecticut. His name will come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Durant. Anyway, looking into, and Barr appointed him to look into what the origin of the so-called counterintelligence investigation against Trump, which led to the FISA court and all that, and Papadopoulos. So they're looking into this guy Mifsud, who is either from Malta, or he's from Italy, or he's a Russian spy, or he worked for the FBI or the CIA. I've read all those reports, but they're looking at Mifsud. And they're looking at another Australian diplomat named Stephen Halper, who seems to be right at the bottom of this counterintelligence investigation against Trump, the candidate, which coalesced right about when it was apparent that Trump was going to get the nomination for the Republican Party, which was in late April, May, June of 2016. That's when it started. And
no,
so
I have no idea about.
I've been
all
following
of this stuff.
that very closely.
It's
5 minutes left. Holy smokes!
It's very difficult. It's difficult to know what the truth is because, quite frankly, disinformation goes out from all sides.
It does.
And they're all pros at it.
They are.
Whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Democrats that might be in charge, or the Republicans, they're pros at it.
And in the meantime, as Hamilton said, this process will seldom fail to agitate the passions of the whole community.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So Trump is a pugnacious person.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can agree on that. I mean, he was, and with his Republican opponents in the primary process, you saw how he acted. And then, if he perceives that there was this conspiracy to prevent his election and then get him out, even during the transition process and so forth, then he's going to fight back, and that's what he's done. So now you have
But you know, it's all funny, Tom. Don't you find it
passions of
funny?
the whole community.
I find it all, what comes around goes around, and goes around comes around, because it's, you know, it goes back to the whole birther thing with Obama, which followed him all the way through, that, you know, implied he wasn't a duly elected president in a way. It goes back to McConnell saying in November of, 2008, that we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure he's a one-term president. You know, all of this seems to pass for politics nowadays. And no matter which side of the aisle you're looking at. And that is what the American people are really upset about.
Since when does an opposing party not
want
to make the opposing party the one-termer? But when you're trying to get him out before his first term is up, that's what's going on now.
Yeah, but I don't think they're trying to necessarily, I mean, they would love to have him out, but he's either going to be in or out in a year.
And either way, I'm concerned about civil unrest.
I am too.
If he wins,
right,
or if he loses.
Yeah, I think that all of that is something to be concerned about. I'm concerned about our republic. I'm concerned about the Constitution.
Me too.
I took an oath the first time when I was 18 to defend the Constitution from all
enemies. And as a selectman, didn't you?
And and as a legislator.
Yeah.
And as a trade secretary.
You become a police officer, you got to do it all.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We probably don't have time for this. The Supreme Court is currently hearing cases concerning employment and the LGBTQ community. Should employers be allowed to terminate an employee based on their gender identity?
No, I don't think they should be able to, based on that. It should be, if the person is there doing their own job and doing a good job, then discrimination against them leads to discrimination against all of us. And so I think if they're there doing their job and doing a good job, why should they be have their jobs terminated just for that? That's my opinion.
Well, I think it's deeper than that. I was reading about, I don't know how much time we have, just this morning I read in National Review, there's a doctor in the UK who was an ER physician for 30 years. And he applied for another job in the National Health Service that was less strenuous, and it had involved screening for disabilities or something like that. And so he was questioned by some panel person who would approve this transfer. Hypothetical condition, you have a transgender person who comes to you and asks if you would call a biological male, says he's a female.
Okay.
Would you call him she? And her, and so forth. And he said, or some third thing, but non-binary thing. And he said, no, I wouldn't. 1 minute. And he was canned. Now, it's similar to what happened in Canada with Jordan Peterson. He was a professor at University of Toronto, and he said, you will call this person a she or whatever if they were not male or female or something. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And so he was threatened with being fired, but he was so articulate that the government backed off. The province, I think, backed off and didn't do it. So it's becoming more and more and more of an issue. You will believed that changes can you can.
Mm-hmm.
So he said scientifically, I don't believe it because I'm a doctor. I know that this is really a man, not a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And as a Christian, I don't believe it because of Genesis. God created man and woman. He created them. So it's still being adjudicated.
Yeah, I just think all people ought to be treated fairly. No matter which side you're on that, people ought to be treated fairly. Justice is important in the United States.
It is, and we have courts to determine that, and we're
Yes.
out of time.
Okay.
And it's been great, as usual, Jim,
it's
and I
good.
hope you do choose to come back in another month.
Okay, thank you. I certainly enjoy it.
Good,
It's
good.
good to have these discussions, Tom.
It is,
Yeah.
yes, indeed.
Thank you.
All right, see you then. Bye,
See ya.
folks.